how much does an Uber Black driver make in 2025? This is going to be a very interesting video as I've interviewed a lot of drivers, of course, some of these luxury drivers. So I'm talking about things like Uber Black, even Uber Lux, Lyft Black, Lyft Lux, basically these luxury rides. And I hate YouTubers that ramble on, so I'm going to give you a short answer and then get into the long answer because this gets kind of interesting. Short answer, from what I've seen, which I know is a huge spectrum, anywhere between $30 to $50-ish an hour. Not bad. Now, getting into the longer answer, as you can imagine with something like this, there's a lot of variables. And one thing I want to say, which I've said a million times in a bunch of videos, like a broken record, is your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. Given your city's layout, the culture, the climate, even like the way the roads are kind of done, that's the biggest thing, is your location. And I think when it comes to these luxury rides, these like black rides, what you're seeing and what I've seen when I've interviewed drivers is your location is even more imperative for a bunch of different reasons. And the big thing I've seen when interviewing drivers all around the country is, as you can imagine, the quote unquote hot cities, if I'd word it like that, are by far the best places to do these luxury rides. If you're in a remote area of Ohio, not gonna be that good at all. You might not notice any difference whatsoever. But if you're in a city like San Francisco, in Los Angeles, Miami, Vegas, New York, take those big five, in my opinion, where a lot of people have money. You're talking about a lot of celebrities, a lot of influencers, a lot of people maybe trying to do some flashy rides, et cetera, et cetera. These are the kind of rides that are going to pay you a lot of money. And I just interviewed one driver in Los Angeles who told me, he's like, sometimes when I used to do luxury rides, I used to do black rides. One thing I will say, as a quick side note, I have done videos about the car requirements to be an Uber Black driver or a Lyft Lux driver or whatever. And one thing I will say is that they are very, very strict. Of course, if you're doing a luxury ride, people want a luxury vehicle. So one big thing that does happen is for some of these luxury rides, they do want your car to be like, say, newer. So one guy told me, he's like, my car used to qualify. And it was one of those things where the car had to be like, I think 5 years or newer or something like that. His car hit the 6-year mark. So unfortunately, didn't qualify anymore. So one thing I do want to say is the requirements are pretty strict in terms of your car, your vehicle, all this kind of stuff. But he told me, he's like, it was not surprising at all that there were some times where I would literally make $100 in 30 minutes. And I was like, wait, $100 in 30 minutes? He goes, yeah, not uncommon. He drove here in LA, and he said especially on like Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, if there was an event, if there was a concert, that was the time for him to really bring it in. And he said, he's like, on average, between 30 and 50 an hour, is what I make. It really would depend. But again, when it was a peak time, what I would do is I would go into the app, and in case you didn't know, if, let's say, you drive for Uber Black, that means you can also drive for Uber. That means you can also do Uber Eats. You have the option to do the top tier, but then all the bottom tiers, but you can select and pick and choose. So what he would do as a strategy, and I've heard this from other drivers as well, is you remove all the bottom tier or the lower tier style rides, and you only say, I want to do Uber Black. I only want to do Uber Lux. I only want to do Lyft Black. I only want to do Lyft Lux. And the big and amazing thing about this is although, yes, you're going to get fewer rides. I remember talking to one driver in Vegas who said that his hourly rate when doing this was about 40 to 50 an hour. So I think that's a bit higher, and I think it makes sense because in a place like Vegas, Vegas is Vegas, right? There's no other way to word that. In a place like Vegas, one thing that you can see is with all these rides happening, he would say, look, although, yes, I might get fewer rides an hour, and that makes sense. You're not like nonstop with Uber rides or Lyft rides like normal. He said, although I might get 1 or 2 rides an hour, sometimes just one, that one ride, even though it was way less rides than normal, because I'm only doing one, would pay way more. So even though, let's say a typical hour, actually the average driver does about 1 to 3 rides an hour, give or take, maybe a little more, a little bit less, but 1 to 3 rides an hour is usually what I'd say as an average. So if you think about it, if you're actually doing 1 to 3 rides an hour, but let's say you're doing only Uber Black or only Lyft Black, only Uber Lux or Lyft Lux, one thing you might see is that you might need to do 1 ride an hour. It might be less. But because that ride pays so much, you're spending way less in gas. Yeah, maybe you have a bit more downtime or leeway time. Like the guy even told me, he's like, what I typically do is bring a book. And this is the driver I'm talking about now in LA that I interviewed. And he's like, I'd bring a book because what I probably do is just kind of sit there, read, I get a ride, do a high-paying ride that might pay me 40-something or 50-something an hour, or for that one ride, get done with that ride, sit and keep reading. And I made sure that every single time I was driving, especially on Friday and Saturday nights, especially in the peak glamorous hours, and especially, like I said, events. If, like I said, there was the Oscars happening, of course, if, like I say, there was a concert, et cetera, I made sure that the only type of rides I did were the Lux rides and Black rides. And again, even if it was a bit slower, even if, like I say, I just wasn't nonstop like a typical Uber or Lyft driver, I still made way more money. Now, the tricky thing about this, I think, in this day and age is, one, of course, the economy is kind of tough, but people are still very willing to spend money on these luxury rides. The second thing is the car. Now, for him, he already had a car that qualified. And I did touch upon in this video the requirements when it comes to Uber Black and Lyft Black and all this kind of stuff. And I've done requirement videos. I'll post them in the description below if you want to watch them specifically for the luxury rides. And I think the tricky thing, here's the tricky thing in my opinion about this is it's kind of this chicken for the egg thing where do you want to invest, if I'd word it like that? Do you want to invest in a luxury vehicle, which is going to cost you way more money per month, or maybe even per week, depending on how you look at it, but now you can do these luxury rides that pay a lot, or do you just stick with the car that you have, or maybe a car that's cheaper every week or every month, but you're not able to do these luxury rides? And here's my honest advice. I think if you look at a market, and if you live in a market like LA, Vegas, San Fran, Miami, New York, like we talked about before, it might be worth testing out. I mentioned before in a lot of other videos, when it comes to renting a vehicle, you're looking at about $100 to $300 a week renting a vehicle when it comes to Uber and Lyft, depending on which one you go with. And I've seen when it comes to, like, say, renting a Tesla, for example, you're looking at about $300 to $400 a week. That's a lot of money. Whether you have your own vehicle or not, that is a lot of money. However, I've heard from so many drivers that although they're spending, a few $100s sometimes more a week. So you're talking about as opposed to spending $400 or $500 a month to rent a car to drive, you're talking about $1,600 a month to drive. Although they're spending that huge premium because they're driving full time, they're doing all these rides. With a Tesla, for example, they still get way more money. So they're walking away with, in this case, driving away with more money, even though they're spending a lot of money up front to rent that vehicle. And it could be the same thing with a luxury car. And it's not a bad idea to look into. I'm going to be honest. Again, if you live in a hot city, to be able to make 30 to 50 an hour, again, maybe even close to 40 or 50 an hour, like the guy said, there were numerous times we made $100 in 30 minutes. I do think those are rare examples, but it doesn't surprise me. Let's say on a Friday night, like I said, especially on a peak hour during an event and that kind of stuff, the ability to be able to make that, especially if you do the smart strategy of only doing these luxury rides, only doing these Black rides, could make it well worth it for you. And it also reduces your expenses. Your car's gonna be driving less because you're doing less rides. You're gonna be spending less money in gas, right? All these kind of stuff that I've talked about in other videos in terms of maintenance. But even still, you're walking away with a way higher ROI. And that's the beauty of doing these Black rides, these luxury rides. But like I said in the beginning of this video, your location really is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. And especially with luxury rides, Black rides, all this kind of stuff, that could never be more true. So one thing I want to say to all the drivers out there is if, let's say this is something you are considering, definitely look into it. If you're in the right city, you have the right schedule to drive during these glamorous times, I'm going to word it like that because, hey, we're talking about luxury rides, it is worth it. But if you live, I think I'll be honest, for 95% of drivers, if you live in a rural area, if you live in an area that's not as hot, if I call it like that, as these cities, or you just don't think anyone does Black rides, you're going to spend a ton of money to have a luxury vehicle or rent one where the ROI is just not going to be there. But that being said, the amount of drivers that I've interviewed who do these Black rides, who do these luxury rides that love it is insane because you can make a ton of money, a ton of tips is what I've heard as well. You're going to have better clientele. You might even meet celebrities or influencers, right? You never know who you're going to meet, especially when it comes to driving these luxury rides. And it can be an excellent way to make a lot of money and have a very high hourly rate.